Welcome back to Story Deep Dive with Dana and Rachel. This is a podcast with two book coaches. We are both editors as well as besties who discuss books, but not as readers. We discuss them as writers. And we use these to draw inspiration from great books with lots of laughs. And y'all, we just be getting it in, okay? So in this episode, we are continuing our conversation about The Woman in the Library by Gentill.
What's her backwards? Last name? Sulari Gentill.
Come on, y'all. I'm gonna just tell y'all from here on out. You don't see, but I'm gonna just point at Rachel, and she's gonna help her girl out, okay? Because Dana knows how to butcher a name. If you've been around here, you know, okay? So today we are continuing that conversation. We're talking about characters. If you have not done so already, don't forget to go back and check out the overview and our discussion around plot. And today's discussion on characters is really going to go hand in hand with what we talked about last week, which is common, but this I think is more so than times before, just because the way this book is written. But before we start talking about characters, Rachel, what do you have going on over there at the Story Cipher?
Okay, so you know that usually about once a month we get a Twitch update. We get an update on what I'm playing and what's interesting and what I'm learning and all of the good stuff. So that's what we're getting today. So at the end of our, I think it was at the end of our Sin and Chocolate series, I mentioned that I was about to start playing a game called Claire Obscure Expedition 33, which is a game that came out, it was either early this year or the end of last year, but it's making a huge splash on the game scene. This is a game that is AAA studio quality, done by a small developer team. It only had 33 developers, which is like, that's across your composers, that's across your animators, like it's the 33 is everybody in the studio, which anymore, because game studios, your average AAA studio has gotten so much larger, is pretty crazy that a small team of 33 would be considered a small team. And this game is making a huge splash because it's beautifully done, like the art, the graphics, the storytelling, the writing, like not just the story, but the dialogue, the gameplay, like all of it is like, it's one of those moments in games where you have a real innovation, right? Like where you have something kind of special, where you have a team break through with a beautiful story, great gameplay mechanics, and like a game that's very visually appealing and that has had a lot of work go into the art of the game. And so I finally got to start playing it, and it is as good. Like, it is living up to the hype so hard. Like, it is beautiful. It is, the gameplay is really, they did this wonderful mix of, if you play video games, you'll recognize these terms. If you don't, we're just going to gloss right over them. But the combat does a mixture of like turn-based and sort of like a real-time parry system, which is, at least in my experience, I've not seen those two things put together at the same time. You usually either have like real-time, turn-based, and then as like a separate category of real-time would be parry-based, where, you know, if you really want to win at the game, you have to learn to time your block perfectly, essentially, and you counterattack, etc., etc. And they combined these two things into just a total package that is really a stunning work of art, all pieces put together. And one of the things that I noticed in my first, like my literal first stream, sitting down playing the game for the first time, is the way that they brought the world building details to bear on the world in a very meaningful way that made it very evocative and that made the world feel very alive. So the premise, and this isn't particularly a spoiler because I think it's even in the trailer, of the premise of the game, is there's a town called Lumiere where, and it's sort of, they live in this world where somebody called the Paintress, every year she paints a new number on this kind of monolith, and anybody who's that age disappears. Like, they just sort of like evaporate and they cease to exist. And so this town has lived under this for so long. It's every year they observe the gommage, is what they call it, which is where the person on the next number down gets evaporated. And there's a whole like culture around this sort of experience of mourning the people you're losing, but it's also a very normal experience. So if they've been around for 100 years, we've gotten down to Expedition 33. So that number ticks down every single year, 99, 98, 97. And every year they send out an expedition to try to essentially kill the paintress so she stops painting these numbers and stops taking people away. But what you see in the town of Lumiere is all these different people who are responding differently to this experience. So this is something that everybody in this world experiences. But how different people cope with it, or how different people understand it, is different. So you meet these sort of like some of these fringe characters who actually like worship the paintress, and they're like, no, like she is like sort of like we have to pay homage to her because she is sort of like the goddess of this land. You have other people who think that the expeditions to destroy the paintress, considering that they have had some tens of them already and not succeeded, they think it's a waste of your last year of life, right? So it's like so if you are 32 and this year is 33, right, you go on expedition, you spend the last year of your life trying to destroy the paintress in hopes that the people who come after you will be able to live a longer life. They won't have to experience the gommage. And so some people say, like, this is a worthwhile way to spend my last year, to attempt to overthrow the paintress, to save the people who will come after me. Other people are of the opinion that spend the last year of your life with your family, make the best of it, and then when your time comes, your time comes. And the reason any of this matters is because that's what makes the world feel real. Because everybody's having the same experience, but everybody's interpretation or means of coping with that experience is different. And you get this kind of smattering of people across the entire town who have a different approach to this. And the reason all of this matters is because if you're writing a world, if you're building a world, this is how you give it nuance, right? So, the whole world might be under, or, the world in which your story takes place might be under a particular, governmental system, or might be under a particular, like, climate, might exist in a certain type of climate. And that's universal to the world that you're in, but how people experience it will not be, it won't be a singular experience or interpretation of that, right? How everybody manages inside of that world is going to be different because that's how people are, right? And that's one of those sort of little takeaways that you can sort of just like cherry pick right off the top of something to say, oh, in my world that has, X quality that is sort of ubiquitous within the environment I'm writing in, how do different people experience this? How do different people cope with it, or make the best of it, or make a living out of it, depending on what that thing is? And that is going to give your world that much more detail, that much more kind of depth and nuance and sense of being more real and more alive, because that's how humans work, right? Like, we all experience things differently, we interpret those experiences differently, and we choose different actions based on those experiences, right? Like, we sort of we position ourselves differently based on our experience and interpretation, and that's very normal. And so it makes your world feel a little more real and a little more interesting because you have that variety rather than this sort of monolithic, everybody feels this way about this thing and everybody reacts in the same way and that kind of thing. So I wanted to highlight that because of what an excellent execution of world building it is, and as sort of one of those easy takeaways that someone can grab and apply to their story today and say, oh, how does it vary across my world and across my environment? So that's what we're doing. We're playing Expedition 33. I get excited for stream every single week because the game is so good. I'm enjoying it so much. So it's been really, really good to just experience something so well made and so meticulously crafted. So that's what we're doing over here. We're writing drafts and playing video games twice a week, and much, much more. But that's the easy summary for right now. Dana, what about you? What's happening over at Danger Tales? What's new? I actually haven't seen you in multiple weeks, and so I'm cherishing the opportunity to find out like what actually is happening over there, because I haven't seen you in a hot minute.
Girl, it probably be easier. What is not happening? Okay, that'd probably be the best. First of all, I want to say I think that is so dope. Now, listen, I always find it fascinating when you get so excited about starting these stories, and then when I go over to the stream, it is some craziness that's going on the actual screen, and
like yelling, occasional swearing. It's really. You're really getting the summarized, censored version here on the podcast.
Very civil, it just is like, okay, that's what I'm looking at. So yeah, I think it's fun. I think it's so cool, especially because as you're doing it, it's something that we've talked about for so long before you actually started, and now like you're just rolling, and it is a thing, and not just a thing that you kept thinking about. And so I'm always excited about that. Let's see what's going on over here. One of the things that you started talking about, your experience with the story, makes me think about one of the things that we've been doing. I do a live writing almost every week, but 2 to 4 times a month.
Insane.
And girl,
being
it is so insane.
Live, so crazy.
Oh, gosh.
I pre-record writing sessions, and I'm like, this is stressful. Forget doing it live, just Louise.
Especially when people are watching and ask questions, and there's some things that you do that you just have no explanation for. And when somebody asks me a detailed question, you already know how my brain goes. I'm like, because I feel like it. I don't know. That's probably not the best answer because I feel like it. But what's been interesting is we've been going through the process for probably about the past month and a half of me plotting a series. And we are still like at the beginning stages of me just talking about how I lay it out, how I began to get the overarching story, how I began to make what I call the story capsules for each story. And now I think at book 3 or 4 or 5, and they are watching how I'm started evolving and how I'm pulling that shadow plot forward, and how I'm working on it and making it so that all the other previous information is relevant even before I've written any of the books. And it has been very interesting to look at how I find that doing that process is something that's great for students to see, because it's something that whenever I'm teaching about plotting, people kind of just write off, well, it's because you've done this a lot. But no, it's because it's a lot of work, right? It's a lot of work, but it pays off when you understand how each one of those books operate in that series and what they contribute to that series. And so looking at everything from the details that I don't know to the details that I'm confident about, and to the details that, okay, I don't know, but I know I want this and I don't want that, and just working it all out until it sort of smooths it out until I feel like, oh, this is going to be so good. And you begin to feel like it all coming together versus having these scattered, handwritten notes and sort of loose concepts of how you want it to progress. And so it's made for a very interesting conversation with students who are there, and to see how they're beginning to adopt certain things or even give certain leniency. Because when you say, oh, well, I pre-plot some of the key details for an entire series, people see it as being, oh, you know everything. You know exactly when this is going to happen and that is going to happen. And many times the answer is, actually, I don't. I don't know. And some things I do allow myself to discover in the moment or in passes and edits and revisions. But there are certain things that I do want locked in, so that when I'm working, I get to work on just that book knowing that it connects. Yeah. And it doesn't break that connection or that loop or that foundation between with the series. And so that's been really good, because normally we do some and then we move on to the next project. But going through and then seeing all the way through, and then them seeing like how I document it and how I sort of hold place for each one of those books and develop the preliminary details about the connecting characters. And so that's been really good. And it sort of makes me think about the secondary thing that we kind of have going on. I'm going to be doing a presentation coming up here soon with Pro Writing Aid, who I really like their virtual events. I think they've done a really great job. This year has been a little bit different. They haven't done as many as what they've done in the past, but I've done presentations for them probably for the past 3 years, maybe.
Yeah.
And they're doing something for Preptober. So if you're not aware what Preptober is, it's the month before previously NaNoWriMo or National Write a Novel Month. Different organizations have spearheaded something similar or close to, just because of things that have gone on with that organization. So I'm not speaking on that, but universally, it's now been a common experience for writers around the world, and I know for sure in this country, to want to be a part of and write a novel in November month, and it's been historically 50,000 words in a month, which is like roughly 1,700 words a day for the month of November. And they're doing a series, so I'll be a part of their prep month in October, and I'll be teaching about what I call my plot accordion. You've heard about it a million times, but it really is this concept and technique that I created maybe about 5 or 7 years ago, that it's meant to address how much should I plot before I'm ready to write. And people think it's a one answer for everyone, and the truth is that's not true. So there's that, and it also is meant to address showing up to a blank page with a blinking cursor. We don't really have blinking cursors anymore, unless you change your settings, or I guess you kind of do if you do it. But if you're having a blank page and it's like, okay, well, how do I get started? And so having this concept of like, okay, here's the plot accordion. If you think of a closed accordion, no matter how little or how much, you decide in between there what suits you. But there's some key information that you can have in that process, and having this foundational technique, then telling and encouraging the writer to evolve that, right? Yeah. Because after you use it and you write a book or two, then you'll know, well, I also it helps me to have this piece of information or to know these details. Someone may just need a couple of bullet points. Someone else may need the setting, the time, the timeline, the characters that are on the page, the characters that are not, depending on how detailed they are. And it's this, understanding that every writer is different. And a part of it is really embracing what makes you feel the most confident when it's time for you to sit down and write. So I'll be doing that. If you are curious, you can always go to Pro Writing Aid. I don't know the date. I think it's the 29th but of October. But if you go to their website, their events are usually free to have access to the replays for a limited period of time. And then I know they normally have something where if you want extended replays, you may have to buy something or another. But that is coming up as well. So yeah, continuing to write, getting ready to hopefully just, have a home run at the end of this year. Yeah. And get all the stuff done and be ready to slide into, a break at the end of the year. But yeah, I think that's what I got going on.
I'm excited for you to get to share about the plot accordion for Pro Writing Aid, because it really, I think a lot of times writers are looking for one and done answers. Well, what do I need to know? It's like, well, it's super annoying, but it depends, because everybody's process is different. And that's where, people will take loads of different classes and they'll try different methods, but you have to find your way, probably the exact way that one writer does it. You might do a variation of their work, but the likelihood that their precise process is going to be also your precise process is, I would say, relatively unlikely. And so creating a method for planning that by design takes into account that everybody is different, and it's like, all right, here's the spread. Now you make your plate and decide what is it that you need on that plate so you can sit down and write confidently, and giving them kind of that letting them see the spread of information that they may want to know, information that may be helpful, and let them figure that out for themselves, because that's That's what it's going to come down to. It's like when you write the thing and when you do the plotting, you are going to learn what you need. And you mentioned this last week, right? And then when you do it again, you'll learn a little bit more about what do I need? What do I like to have on hand? How much planning do I like to have done in advance? How much am I discovering? And you learn a little bit more of that every time you do it. And you can pick that up and you refine your own process. So just presenting, particularly for Preptober, particularly before everybody's about to go, like, just nose to the grindstone, to write the 50,000 words in the month of November, to like kind of give them that space to say, find what works for you, and giving them a way to kind of figure that out, I think is really, really helpful. Because again, we want hard and fast answers, and setting expectations as early as possible that hard and fast answers don't really exist here. I think is really good for the health of the writer and for setting those expectations so they can stay sane going into the process and not put unfair expectations on themselves or on the process.
I also find that it's helpful for people who think they don't want to do it because they're a pantser, right? That they may feel like, okay, because I'm a pantser or I'm a discovery writer, then there is no prep. I just sit down. And I think that's a disservice too, right? That there are some things that you can do, even if you are a pantser, or that you can do that'll make it so that when you sit down, that you can get the most from that time. And most of what I teach and techniques that I create come from lived experience of like, you have a very finite time to be able to write. You want to get the most from that time. Sitting and staring. Listen, it helps to get there. However, you know what? Listen, because the time gonna keep ticking. It's not gonna wait for you to come up with a bright idea. So, and so I find that, couching it in a way that makes it so it's obtainable, but also that giving it that a little bit of attention and care to preparing can also be something that can help you on the other end when you are editing. Oh my gosh. So you can help yourself in so many ways. Just by giving yourself a few minutes and to be able to do some of these things. So I'm always looking forward to it. I love presenting for them. I usually have a great time. It's probably one of the fastest 45 minutes to an hour ever. It just zooms past.
Right by.
Oh my gosh. I feel like I'd be like talking at the and I look up, oh my gosh,
Yes.
But it goes. But it's, so I would say take a look at it. If you want to join, you can always go to storydeepdive.com and find out information about either one of us to find out where. But if you go to their website, you can probably find stuff at any time this month.
Yeah. So registration is open, and you can register. It's free to register, and then there's like a dashboard, and they'll show you like the schedule and all that good stuff. So you can see who's presenting on what and when. And I think you can register probably all the way through novel November. To the end. Because there's going to be in December, there's going to be like another thing about like post novel November. They're having a few more events and speaking and stuff in December as well.
Yeah, exactly. So they're going from October to December. I don't know if they're doing separate registrations or they're going to collapse them all together, but yeah. Okay. Awesome sauce. So with that said, y'all, that's what we got going on. If you haven't done so already, don't forget to visit storydeepdive.com. You can find out information about both of us and what we're doing. You can always join our individual newsletters so you know what's happening. And you can always, follow us on the podcast to know as we get into what we got going on. But it's easier to stay in the know when you subscribe. So with that said, we are going in and diving into the characters for The Woman in the Library. And if you could, Rachel, go ahead and give us the summary, and then we can kind of jump in and see what we're going to be chatting about today.
Absolutely. So the woman in, I started wrong. The very first words out of my mouth were not the words I wrote in my summary.
Wait, did I say woman in the library? I feel like I keep wanting to say woman at the well.
I am 99% sure you said the woman in the library.
I think I did too.
I'll know for sure when I'm editing the podcast, but I'm pretty sure it was the woman in the library.
We're like, no, this is not a biblical story. Okay.
Ooh. All right, let me start over. In The Woman in the Library, four strangers are united by a single moment, a single scream, while sitting next to each other in the Boston Public Library. What follows is an amateur sleuth investigation among four friends: tatted psychology student Marigold, Harvard law kid Whit, dashing author Kane, and our protagonist Freddie, a writer on fellowship working on her debut novel. But as this new friendship unfolds, so too do secrets. The biggest one of them might just be a killer. And scene.
And cut. So with that said, this is a Rachel pick, which we've said the previous weeks. And so, Rachel, what are some of the things that you would like for us to discuss when it comes to the characters in this novel?
Yes, ma'am. So this, again, you mentioned this earlier in the episode, but this, talking about the characters is so interesting because it really is so married to our discussion of the plot. So it feels so much like a continuation of our plot discussion. And that happens for most books, but it's like this one, like even more so, just again, like you already said. So one of the things I want to talk about is like the strength of the characters coming from the details, and how Sulari Gentill uses the character interactions and how they're getting to know each other in the context of this case to really showcase who they are. And then the second thing, so I've just got really two broader topics. I want to talk about our protagonist, Freddie, and how that the use of a first-person narrator gets us really up close and personal with her, and the effect that it kind of has on the story and her as a writer, and its kind of contribution to that like meta-narrative of like books about books. That's sort of the thing that this story is like a part of the overall structure and conception of this book. What about you? What are some of the things that you want to talk about when it comes to characters for this story?
We pretty much are on the same page. I think mine is going to fold nicely around yours. One of the things that I made a huge note of was the balance of the characters. And when we look at like their background and their details, and sort of, if I've married it with one of my other bullet points, which was like, it made me think about the things that we consider when we're doing character development, and those sort of nuances that we sometimes can build in our characters, and how in this case, she uses those really well to help the mystery unfold. And I just thought she just did that beautifully. The other thing that we touched on in last week's episode, but I think it's important just to mention again, of just her, I listed it as secrets and suspects, and her choice of using that sort of intimate cast that's getting to know each other as also the suspects. And so it took a world that could have been really big, and sort of closed it in, and just sort of made it so that any additional characters that sort of came into the space were sort of connected to one of those core people in that four friend group. Yeah. And I think it really serves this well because there is a lot of moving parts, but it doesn't feel busy.
Yeah.
And I think it's because of that choice. So those are the things that I have. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump into this. You sort of married two of the topics that I listed for you, sort of talking about the character details and also the character. I listed it as characterization. So let's talk about that a little bit between their interactions, the case details, the responses, and the things that we see in this novel.
Yeah. So, one of the things that Gentill did really well, and again, we mentioned this even in last week's episode, but is making those moments between the friends and that getting to know each other process relevant to the plot itself. And because, right, chapter 1 is when the scream happens in the library and they're kind of unified by this moment, one of the first things they start talking about is what happened, right? And as they talk about what happened and increasingly sort of become involved in an effort to find out the truth of what happened, it's doing this dual, it's multitasking, right? So we're getting to know the characters, and we're getting to know the characters through the way that they respond to the problem, right? The way that they think that the group should go about, like what their interpretations of the facts are, how they think the group should be approaching the problem, how they sort of are feeling about the information that everybody's kind of getting at the same time or near the same time, and then how they're interacting with each other inside of everything that's going on. And what's so awesome about that is that it really gives the author the opportunity to showcase the individual characters, right? By really capitalizing on every opportunity to let us see how are they thinking through things, what are their, and this, just like you said, goes into sort of some of those like quirks and character development details, really brings those onto the page in relevant ways and in ways that are very evocative of helping us understand those individual characters.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, and this is sort of like marries well with me just thinking about how she balanced those characters, their background stories, what brought them there. Like they all had some sort of, well, give or take, connection with the literary and writing books, etc. But what got them there to this place is a part of that unfolding of the mystery, right? Of like what makes them a prime suspect, if you will, for what starts unfolding. And you find that this is one of those things that goes into our development process. And sometimes you like, oh, you know, do we need all these quirks and habits and, you know, all these different things? But the way she did it here, as the main protagonist, Freddie, was getting to know each one of them, it was relevant to what was going on. And or the lack of knowing that piece of information about their backstory or how they got here was relevant to what was going on. And I just thought that was a great use of it. And I think it made it so that it was almost, you could see it clearly, because sometimes you do those little things and you're like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do with all this fun information about my character? Okay, they're like Dr. Peppers. Now what? And here it was a way to see how the two connect, how preparation meets getting it on the page. And I just really, really liked that. And so it folded into the character development really well. And the balance part of it is because I think given any other circumstance, give or take one or two of them, they wouldn't have crossed paths. They would have been in each other's orbit, but they wouldn't have become what they did over the course of the story had that scream not happened and they were all present. And so I think, again, like the setup, beginning of the story, and the characterization and the characters really just, it was a chef's kiss on this. Now, one of the things when we talk about them, before we get to your other thing about actually, I want to talk about the protagonist first, Freddie, and you kind of making mention of her character and her first person narrative. I'd love for you to sort of consider some of that, because we get a lot from her, and I like it because this is an amateur sleuth that I cannot say that I've encountered a character like this. Again, it reminds me so much of like a Cozy, you know, but she's just a writer. But yes, I'd love for you to sort of discuss that a little bit more too.
Yeah, actually, it's really cool. This only just dawned on me, but like the conversation of our individual characters dovetails perfectly into this, because the setup at the very beginning of the novel is Freddie, our protagonist. So again, it's written in first person present tense, so we're in Freddie's head the entire time for the primary thrust of the narrative, we'll say, not the framing story. But we're inside of Freddie's head, and the story opens with her observing the characters that we are going to meet. And she is trying to, because she's a writer, she is trying to parse out who these individuals are, right? She's like, oh, look at that tatted girl reading Freud. That's really interesting. Well, why is she sitting there? And then she's looking over at Whit, and he's, you know, studying a law book, but he's been on the same page for a long time. And he's like, huh, do you think that, and she gives them names, right? He's got this really great, like, dimpled chin, and she's like, oh, well, I'm going to call him Heroic Chin, right? Because she doesn't know his name. Like, well, there's Heroic Chin, and Freud Girl kind of seems like she's maybe, like, looking over her book at him. Do they know each other? Is he stalking her? Is she stalking him? And then there's Kane, and she's like, he's kind of hot. She's like, so he's, like, you know, he's a handsome guy. He's a handsome man. You know, she's like, well, what is he doing? And then she starts speculating about, like, how do they know each other? And just this very, very early... you know, this is like within the first couple of paragraphs of the story. And it's really it's doing a lot for us. So first of all, it's setting the tone of the story itself. And it's also putting us into Freddie's mind, which is really establishing, you know, she's trying to make connections. And she is trying to sort of like pull the details apart and understand what's happening, while then simultaneously, as though we're not doing enough already, actually giving us like a little introduction to the characters through Freddie's eyes. And she is seeing, so the first thing she sees of Marigold is the fact that she looks super intense. She's like covered in tattoos. I think she's got a nose ring. Like she looks like, pretty intense.
Edgy.
And like, exactly. And the moment she meets Marigold, she's like, oh, there is something incongruous about the way she looks and the way she behaves. She looks like she should be one way, but when you meet her, she's sort of she's very different from that. And so we get a picture into Freddie's author mind, which is a part of sort of the meta nature of the story, books about books, and being in the brain of an author, as she's trying to write a book and happens to be sort of like stuck, having a bit of writer's block when the story opens. And so she's sort of staring at people and just kind of like making up stories about them in her head to try to get the creative gears going. And so it really brings us, you know, she really leverages that first person narrator. And I think too, the fact that it's in present tense. So we're just getting like her thoughts as they're hidden, right? Just as they're going, what Freddie is thinking and feeling, we are right there with her. And it allows us to kind of get into Freddie's mind, and she becomes the vehicle through which we experience the story, while at the same time being her own person. And so we get to know her both in her interactions and in the thoughts that she keeps to herself, like the fact that Kane is designated as handsome man.
I totally agree. I think, in romance, first person present tense is common, right? But it really does something to make the selection, and it affects really just how close we get to the point of view character. Yeah. And we do get that, especially as she goes forward and starts having feelings, and she is trying to get answers to questions that she's never thought she'd need to get answers to. Even just in her adjustment to American culture and verbiage and all of that. I just felt like she just felt so relatable, even though she could have been a person that's in an unrelatable environment for many people, like who gets to, go to an Ivy League, writing program. But even in that, the little details early on about why she was there and her process with grief and things like that, just all those little things using first person present tense really does allow us to sort of get into that space, and really work it out as she's trying to decide what to believe, what not to believe. Can she trust her own judgment? Can she trust what she believes is true? About her new friends. And so I think it just was, again, another chef's kiss. With that said, we sort of touched on it last week, but I think it connects perfectly here. But where we talked about secrets, and I just listed it as secrets and suspects, as in the cast as suspects. So we have a fairly nice sized cast, because a nice sized cast, even though the story is told through Freddie's point of view. And part of keeping that cast contained in this story is that the author, she decided to make it so that the cast of friends are also the suspects. And I'd love to talk about this, because to me, being that this is like I feel like this is my first rodeo like this. I love characters, and I'm just sort of in my mind dissecting it a little bit. But how does that work here? Is a common practice? And what are some of the things I think like writers should think about when they're developing a cast like this for this kind of story?
Oh, I love this question so much. It's such a good question. Okay, so I would say that this is not particularly common to set your immediate cast as your murder suspects. It's not wholly uncommon. So if you think about, oh man, I always get, Lucy Foley's The Hunting Party. So The Hunting Party is a first-person narration told from multiple points of view, and they're all friends who are getting back together, like for a get-together. So they've been friends for a long time, but they're getting together for the first time, away, and it's very much like locked room murder mystery. So it's not unheard of that the friend group would be the cast of suspects, and it really is a great way to really, really narrow the scope, especially when The Hunting Party is a locked room style because they're in kind of an abandoned or like an isolated space, so there's only these few people who can be the potential suspects. When you're telling a story like this one that takes place in freaking Boston, you have, theoretically, yes, have infinite suspects. And so using the friends as where you constrain it in that way, it makes it possible for your amateur sleuth to investigate and for your suspect pool to reasonably be people that your amateur sleuth is actually going to meet, right? And so one of the things when you're developing a cast of suspects, your suspects are absolutely essential to your mystery because they are the people from whom we are choosing a murderer, and they are the people that we are the most interested in spending time with because we want to know what's their deal, who are they, what was their relationship to the victim, what are they hiding. And so when you're crafting suspects, you want to look at their interrelationships with other characters. You want to look at what were they doing at the time. You want to look at why would they have a reason to have committed the crime. Because what's going to happen is in the course of the investigation, your protagonist is going to be triangulating all of this information to figure out who did it. So when you add in that there is information that they are withholding, that becomes one of your key points of interest, because when we're going through a crime story, what we're interested in unpacking is the interrelationships among the characters. That's primarily right, because really the truth of the crime comes down to not just who did it, but why did they do it. And so those character interrelationships are one of the things that's fueling our interest in the story. And you really want to take that into account if you're creating a crime story, whether it's a murder mystery, whether it's a cozy, or whether it's like a gritty crime story. You want to spend the time on that cast of suspects and give them interrelationships with one another as well as other characters in the story. You want to make sure they're withholding information because that's what's going to fuel your reader's curiosity about the story and about the truth of the crime, and that's really filtered more than anything. You will have physical clues. That is going to be a feature of many of your crime stories. But the thing that's really fueling our curiosity is going to be the characters and the suspects. And so that's really, that's why your suspect pool matters so much, because that's really what's going to fuel your reader's curiosity about it. So by pulling that in to be our group of friends, and we're exposing our protagonist to them and getting to know them over time, and that information gets more and more interesting as it pertains to the case, it's keeping us locked into that small cast, our narrow scope of suspects. Given the fact that we're in Boston and we could have any number of them, we've narrowed the focus so we know. And again, she plays fair with us of this is your cast of suspects, right? This is who you have to choose from. And so now we're looking closely at every single one of them, and everything we learn is bringing us, we hope, one step closer to the truth, and it's the misdirects that'll kind of come back around and surprise us in the end.
Yeah, listen. The fact that everybody could get it. Listen, I was just like, I was every 5 minutes I was wish-washy changing my mind. Like,
Yep.
it's her. I know it's her because she needs to quit pacing back and forth in front of that boy's house. Listen,
Yes.
I was just like, it was just too many coincidences. Like, oh, how'd you get her phone number? Like, I was just like, and then wait, then my brain turned to everybody a suspect. Now I don't care. All of
You're like
them.
that old lady at the front desk. You, what do you got going on over there? What's happening over here?
It could be all of you, okay? But I what I loved most is that you had those technical components locked in, but then you also had a very interesting sort of rhythm and dynamic between them that made it very compelling, especially because, like I said in our last episode, it wasn't like this life or death. It was life or death stakes, yes, because there were people that died, but it wasn't like heart racing sort of palpitations sort of experience. So being very curious and interested about each one of them and getting into the reality or the truth about their secrets and the things that they chose to disclose or not, and when they decided to, and how those truths came out in times that they didn't have control over. It just made it, again, very, very, very dynamic. So when you pull back and you look at the characters in the story, this is a huge question, and you answer it any way that you want to. You can simplify it. Yeah, if you do not know, Rachel has a workbook that may be really great if you're doing this type of story. So a crime writer's workbook. So, make sure you go to Story Cipher and see, because we can't teach all of the things. This is just to wet your whistle. Okay. That's what we used to say, just to wet your whistle. But what are some of the things that you feel like are just huge takeaways that this story did well when it comes to characters? And then I would also ask, conversely, what are some things that you maybe felt like could have been a little bit better, if you have any? Because I'm gonna let you think about it, because I can say I don't feel like that I would say there's anything that could be done better. I think she played her own game when it comes to the author of this book. And so it made it so, which is something we'll talk about in our editor's takeaway. I think it made it feel very inventive and something that's been around for a long time, according to what I've learned from you. So therefore, it makes it easier to be able to dictate and determine what your boundaries or your rules are for how you're playing, and she played by those rules well. But I will say that I think the best part of this is that she made each one of those characters/suspects stand on their own 2 feet, that they all had reason to be the suspect, and they all had reason to not be, that it could have just been chalked up to being just quirky, right? Just being an oddball, or just being privileged, or just being however it is you want to, and which made it that much more frustrating when I was trying to figure it out, which, I mean, I get that's what people want. So I feel like this would be a great one if you want nuanced characters, that you want characters that have depth, and the dynamics of their depth varies to trauma, to access, to intellect, and all of those things coming together for a very interesting friend group that make the basis of the story. And so now I've given you some time to think about it. So things that you think the story did amazing when it comes to the characters, and if there's any other opportunities that may have been missed.
Yes. So really, just a quick side thing. So when this episode airs, the second edition of the Crime Writers Workbook will be out. So I added additional pages and templates, as well as like a video introduction, to talk a little bit about crime and how to use the workbook and stuff like that. So, that's a fun detail that I have honestly neglected to mention at every stage throughout the podcast, because I totally forgot. But yes, the second edition is out now when you hear this podcast. So
And,
what?
and that's why your girl got to help you, because you wasn't gonna say nothing. She was gonna let y'all just be out there YOLO on your own. Okay.
I know. Thank you. You're being a buddy to your buddy right now.
Come on.
Appreciate you.
You're like, she does have a resource now.
Yeah, how that hasn't come up at what, like, we're in a decided murder mystery, and the fact that it hasn't come up once is like, honestly, that's like textbook Rachel right there. Yeah. It's just like,
that's okay. I got you.
Thank you. So what this story did well with regard to characters. So there's nothing that I don't there's nothing I think she could have done better. So I'll just answer that right off the bat. I just think that for what the story was aiming to do and what the story was, she had a wonderfully colorful cast. And she really attached us to every single one of them, which meant that we didn't want the killer to be any of them. Like, exactly. You know, as we got to know them, we were endeared to them more and more. And that made, like, that being our pool of suspects that much more like, oh, I don't want this. Like, I want to know who did it, but also, oh. And so I want to highlight a couple of the key things. So we already talked about secrets and withheld information, which really is one of the things that she did so well with this cast. And the thing about that too is that I would be paying attention to how that information comes to light throughout the story. So if you're trying to write a story like this, really, so again, we always say this, read it first just for the experience, just enjoy it as a reader. And then when you're going back through it to study it more deeply, look at when do we get this information about them or from them, and how does this information arise, right? So is it given voluntarily? Does it come up sort of like by accident? Does it come up involuntarily? And looking for those things, because that's going to help give you fuel for how do my suspects, like how does my protagonist get information from my suspects? What are the opportunities for them to say, to tell the truth, for them to outright lie, and for information to come out that they sort of didn't agree to tell that came out by some other means? Because that's the kind of stuff that we really want in a crime story, that is a great thing to be looking at for this one, because we want to look at what are all of my options for how my protagonist is going to get information about these people. The other thing that I would be paying attention to that this book did really well is the interrelationships among characters. Mm-hmm. Again, it is the relationship in a crime story. It's the relationship between characters that keeps us interested. Because again, we're not just looking at characters and their relationship to the victim, but then to all of the other pieces on the board. Because essentially, your protagonist is going about their merry way investigating. And in theory, all of these characters are still moving off stage and doing something, right? They're all kind of just doing their own thing. So when we discover, these two characters are having an affair, this is why they lied. These two, this character was slacking off on their job and lied about what they were doing because they didn't want to get in trouble with their boss. And you've got all of these different characters who have these variable relationships to each other, and we get to draw the line between them and say, oh, this person knows this person. Well, if they knew this person, then they had, a second degree of relationship with the victim. Aha, mm-hmm. Right? And again, that's the kind of stuff that we want to synthesize. And so paying attention to those interrelationships, and by virtue of those interrelationships, then using that to curate the way that your characters interact with each other, because those interactions are where you showcase who the characters are and what they're like. And so really taking the time to think about, how do these characters know each other? What is their relationship to each other? Okay, now that I know that, and let me tell you, just doing that exercise will give you some major grade T for your story. And I can vouch for this because that was one of the things that cracked one of the problems I was having with my story, is there were two characters that I hadn't explored their relationship yet because they hadn't been on the page together. And I was like, I hadn't had an occasion to think about it and then I was like, oh, I haven't looked at these two characters. And then when I looked at their relationship, it sort of like bloomed out into like all of these other interrelationships. And it told me about there were these two characters, and then it told me about all these other characters surrounding them once I asked that question. And so taking the time to do that is going to give you, like I said, some serious tea for your story, which are the kinds of things that your reader is going to be wanting. And then when you extrapolate that to, okay, now how do they interact? How does that cause them to interact? Because if you think about, a couple whose marriage is strained, but they're trying to pretend like everything's fine, right? That gives you the flavor for that scene or that dialogue where you're like, oh, they're going to be, that one spouse might subtly undermine the other, or one spouse might continually interrupt the other, and then you see the frustration building on the one. Like, this is where then you can use that to give your scene some of that narrative fuel and intrigue for your reader. And this story does all of those things. So those are kind of the three major things I'd be looking at for what the story did well, and kind of what you can pull from it for your own story. And some of those things even apply for not crime, right? When you're just telling a regular old story and you're like, oh, how do these characters what is their relationship and how do they interact and what does that mean? You can pull all kinds of good stuff from that.
Mm-hmm. I would say, and then my final question for you about if there's any parting words when it comes to the characters. But I will say for anyone that's listening to this, I mean, we have covered different genres already since we've been doing this podcast over the year. And I think there is so much that can be learned from the character's perspective for any genre. It just so happens that it's a mystery. And I think it shows how to showcase some of the dynamics that make those, I feel like I'm saying dynamics a million times, but I don't mean to, show the differences between them and also the similarities. And thus, those are some of the things that you want to do in any book, right? Because those side characters or those secondary characters or incidental characters should have a reason to be there. Mm-hmm. Now, in this case, they have the reason because they are both friend and potentially a foe or a suspect, but you can take some of those same sort of principles and apply it to whatever story that you're working on so that you have characters that are not flat and they are 3D, right? They feel like something or someone that your readers know. And sometimes when you see characters like that in this sort of environment, you get to experience a sense of fullness of that character that may be limited in other places, like a romance, when the focus really is on the two protagonists and the others are sort of just sprinkled in. But in this case, it's all relevant, and you can extract one and not have the story be affected by the missing element. And so you can use that to help you if characters is somewhere that you want to strengthen. Or if you really want to look at some great characters to be able to knock it out the park. Yeah. And so before we get ready to close out this episode, I think we are rolling, y'all. Are there any other parting words when it comes to the characters and the woman in the library?
I actually just want to highlight what you just said, which was, paying attention for your cast and really asking yourself, do they lift easily out of the story? Making sure that your cast, every part of your cast contributes to the story in a meaningful way. And asking yourself, if they lift right out, either maybe they don't need to be there, or I need to weave them in a little bit more, make them a little bit more, just tied into that plot a little bit better, or tied into the interrelationships a little bit better, so that they don't feel like a loose thread just sticking out that you could just kind of and pull right out. So I think you made a really good point about just making sure that those characters kind of pull their weight right in the story and add something to it. Yeah, I think we've covered pretty much everything that was on my list, and managed to, our characters are interconnected with our plot for this story, and still managed to have new stuff to talk about and new things, even though we had to talk about the characters by necessity and plot as well. So that just lets you know how well done I think this was. So
yes, and the last thing that I will say is that this story does a great job of having characters that are not all good and not all bad. And I think we can get, I don't want to say it's common, but it is that we can make characters that are caricatures, right? Yeah. but in novels, you want it so that we're sort of immersed in an experience. And even those characters that may serve as your antagonistic energy, they're still good in them. And there's still things that, even whether it's a warped sense of truth or whatever that they believe, and it's something that we can benefit from when it comes to seeing it on the page and seeing their journey evolve in the story. And I think that's what made these really good. So that you, like you said earlier, we didn't want any one of them to be it, but every once in a while we'd be like the side eye.
Yep.
Like, ugh.
Yep.
Like, I'm looking at you, but I don't want to make eye contact. It's just, so I think that's when you know you have a great dynamic. And even when, I'm not saying no names, I felt like, okay, are you gaming right now? Are you gaslighting? And then I was like, and then of course I got my puppy, he think I'm talking to him. No, I'm not talking to him, I'm talking to this book. Gotta see what's going on.
When you're walking Mr. Pittman talking, and he's like, "Sorry, babe, are you talking to me?"
Yes, or I was laying on the couch and then Boogie decides to think I'm talking to him too. But I think that's when you know you have something good, because you want to talk and you want to interact and you want to engage and you're trying to figure out. And she didn't give it away. She didn't give it away. And you're going to work for every one of those moments. And that just made it such a wonderful, wonderful story to read. So with that said, y'all, we have done the daggone thing. This is another episode that is in the can. If you're following along, don't forget to visit us online at storydeepdive.com. We have one more episode in this conversation about the woman in the library. And you don't want to miss it as we come back with our editor's takes next week. If you've missed the previous episodes, go ahead, rewind, bring it back, and take a look at it. I will also say you may want to take a look at some of the other picks that we've had that I was saying Rachel picks, because they would come alongside this story really well. And I like that we are picking ones that are different, because you may find that, no, this is my pocket, or I can't remember the one that I want to cry on, the thumper.
The whistleblower?
Yes, or the whistleblower, or Ninth House, or technically is a hybrid, the Sookie Stackhouse, or Dead Until Dark. But I love how when it comes to our mystery selections, we sort of have run a spectrum, and I'm sure that's going to come up again the way that it did in the overview when we talk about sort of bringing this all together and wrapping this thing up with a bow. So don't forget to visit us at storydeepdive.com. Leave us a comment, leave us a question, because every once in a while we have Q&A episodes. You also can visit us wherever you listen to this podcast and leave us a rating. We would absolutely love that. And if you have storytelling friends that would love to hear more about some of the books that they may want to add to their TBR to strengthen their storytelling skills, then send us their way. With that said, we will see you all on the final episode of this book next week. And as always, take care and happy writing. Goodbye.